So we were talking. We just did a video responding to Joey Carbstrong. And one issue that came out of that, it's mentioned very briefly in that video, is that in fact, when we as vegans refuse to buy meat, we do not save the lives of any animals. Even though as a propaganda statement, as a promotional statement, as an ideological statement, many vegans will say, I am vegan for the animals, or I am vegan to save the lives of animals. And it's a lot of websites will tell you, as a statement of fact, that if you are vegan, you save maybe 4 cows a year and so many fish per year and so much, that you are saving animal lives. Right? So what came up in the last video we did is that this is not true. It may be useful as a propaganda claim, but what actually happens in a free market society is that if you and I as individuals refuse to buy meat, the price of meat comes down. It makes meat cheaper and more readily available for meat eaters. So that's true if just you and I, just a few people, boycott meat. The only impact we can have from the boycott itself, in terms of supply and demand, is making meat cheaper because there's less demand and there's the same amount of supply out there, right? But even when you scale it up, even if you're talking about vegans in their thousands, vegans in the tens of thousands, and vegans in the hundreds of thousands, all we are doing by boycotting those industries is making their products cheaper and more readily available. And if you want to scale it all the way up, look at an enormous country like India. This really puts the lie to the claim that reducitarians are saving animal lives. India has millions and tens of millions of people who are variously vegetarian, vegan, reducitarian, somewhere on that end of the spectrum. The cows are still getting their throats slit. It doesn't eliminate the meat industry, and you can do the math. You can very easily do economic projections. If everyone in India ate meat, then what would happen to the price and availability? Meat would become scarce. In terms of supply and demand, meat would become more expensive if suddenly everyone in India ceased being vegetarian, right? So on a large scale, it doesn't stop the cycle of exploitation and suffering. I think this came as a surprise to you. I mean, when we mentioned the last video, you said afterwards, I never thought of it that way before, that we're not saving the lives of animals.
Yeah, well, I thought about it also in the context of dairy because
right.
I come from a family where when dairy is cheap, they're like, my parents were like, hey,
They'll
let's
stock up.
buy a bunch of milk, like.
Right.
So I can totally see that being the case.
Right.
Like, if the price goes down, that doesn't mean that there will be less demand.
Right.
And I think it'll be probably equivalent demand or maybe even more.
So this also happens just due to price shocks. Sometimes without vegans being a factor, the less than 1% of people who are vegan or whatever, the price of milk goes up and down. The price of specific type of meat like pork or beef goes up or down. However, even when there is some kind of big dislocation in the market, like there's a big economic crisis or a recession or a depression or a war breaks out, these are things on a huge scale that can suddenly cause meat to become more expensive or more cheap. You can have sudden dislocation in the market. This also never saves the life of even one animal. All right, and I want to emphasize this because many vegans will evade this point. They'll say, well, that may be true on a large scale. You're talking about supply and demand and the price going up and down. Yeah. But still, somehow, me personally, by me refusing to eat meat at this table, there's one cow somewhere at one factory who's not being killed. No, there isn't. You, as one vegan, and we, as 100,000 vegans, we can never have as much impact as a recession, like the 2008 recession, sudden economic change, or of a outbreak of a huge war. We can never have that kind of impact on the market, on the economy in the abstract, nor on the meat industry specifically. However, even when that happens, even when there's a sudden dislocation, so she's talking about her parents go to the store and suddenly find for some reason dairy products are cheaper.
Dairy or eggs or
who knows
whatever.
why. There's some temporary market feature that's caused this to happen. When it is not profitable to raise, slaughter, and sell the animals, they kill them and put them in a ditch. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about if you have any experience in the meat industry or on farms or what have you. It is true. In Canada, this happened repeatedly during my lifetime. The market price of pork drops so low that farmers cull their pigs, that they kill them without sending them to a slaughterhouse. So even when that happens, even if the price, so again, yes, you can lower the price by being vegan. Yes, 100,000 vegans can lower the price. But when you lower it more, it doesn't save the life of one pig. They don't say, oh, well, you know what, pigs are so cheap now, I'm going to take this pig and release it into the forest. Or I'm going to take this pig and turn it into someone's house pet. No, they cull those pigs, sometimes through gassing, sometimes through bullets, Sometimes through cruel methods like starvation. That's actually an issue in Canada, is trying to enforce against cruel methods because they can just, not feed them, let them starve to death on the farm. And of course, this is obviously, I've just said this about pigs, but cows, even deer, because some of those smaller meats, a deer raised, not wild deer, they're raised for their horns and so on. Sorry, it's a complex market, but that also, the price can go up and down. And then suddenly they just get rid of a bunch of deer, and so it's like, well, it's not worth raising these deer. The felt of their horns is valuable. Yeah, as well as their meat. They do also sell venison. But you can imagine, the venison market, the price can go up and down quite unexpectedly and so on. Not because of vegans. So yeah, culling those animals. So this is one reality. No, you as a vegan have not saved even one animal through your diet. You as a vegan have not saved one animal by banning this material. And I have to put in as a footnote, it's possible you've saved an animal by swimming into a pond and rescuing an animal when it was drowning, or climbing up a tree and rescuing an animal from a tree. I'm not saying you've never saved an animal's life. You may have, hands-on, in that sense. But the economic function of the boycott does not save lives. It's a lie. It's a propaganda lie. And I've said this about why I quit Buddhism. I don't want to be part of a religion that's built on a lie. I don't want to convert other people to a religion through lying to them. I don't want to be part of a political movement that's built on a lie. Same kind of reasoning for me. And I'm not going to lie. I don't lie to others, and I don't lie to myself. So whenever I see those charts saying the number of lives you've saved this year by being vegan, or how many lives you save, I say no. And again, we can look at real-world examples. Taiwan, Israel, India, these are countries with big vegan populations. Those are probably the three biggest proportionally. And no, it doesn't save a single life.
Yeah, I'm a committed vegan, but it is interesting for me to think about these things. It's not like I would go back to eating meat after finding this out.
Right.
Or like you were really thinking about it more tonight. Like now that I realize that I'm not saving an animal's life, I'm not. It's not like I'm going to go back to buying meat.
Right.
Because I do feel like that is contributing. Like, I mean, other than personal purity, like what is the reason? Well,
I think there are two things here. One is about doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a fundamental question.
Yeah.
So we have some fancy electronics here. If you can buy this is a portable speaker. If you can buy this made by slaves, or say, no, I refuse to support the slave industry.
Yeah.
Your symbolic act is to refuse to support slavery. It's a choice. And in politics, I'm going to come back to this, symbolic actions matter. When I was involved in Cambodian politics, watching politics in places like Cambodia and Laos much more closely, Cambodia had a sham election, an election that was not legitimate and was controlled by the government. And I remember banging my hand on the desk and saying, why don't the Japanese close their embassy? Why don't the Japanese lower their flag? I don't expect Japan to invade Cambodia. It's ridiculous. I don't expect Japan to even cut off trade with Cambodia. But lowering your flag and making a public statement, these elections were not legitimate, that's powerful and important, and it is symbolic. And in the English language, some people are watching this video, we always say merely symbolic. You think symbolic is nothing? You think it's merely symbolic? No, it would matter if the government of Japan stood up and said, hey, we know the difference between a legitimate election and a fake one, and this is a fake election, and your government has no legitimacy. That matters in politics. Okay, and it matters when people stand up and say, look, this is a nice electronic trinket, but I don't want it if it's made by children or slaves or prisoners, prison labor is another issue.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to draw the line somewhere. Now, that can be the start of a political process, but the boycott in itself doesn't have any of those outcomes, right? It's the start. It's the first step. It's not the last step. And the next point I want to raise illustrates this further, although it's not directly the next step. So we're talking about the pricing mechanism, which is a fundamental aspect of economics, not just in capitalism, even in communism, in all economic, even in feudalism, in all economic systems, the pricing mechanism is fundamental. Supply and demand, prices go up and down, okay? Even in the cocaine market, you know what I'm saying? No matter what we're talking about, these same laws of physics, if you like, are at work. What is the impact of government subsidy on the dairy industry, of government support for milk and cheese, and in many cases, meat? The government supports the production of meat. Now, we can't generalize too simply here. It is actually different in the United States than it is in Canada. It's very different in New Zealand. I did some reading about that because I have some supporters on Patreon from New Zealand. And it was different in England and France. Different countries have different mechanisms. However, the fundamental point I made here was when you boycott meat as a vegan, you make meat cheaper and more available. What happens when you abolish government support for meat, when you abolish government subsidy for the dairy industry? Then dairy products become more expensive, they become less readily available, less regularly available also. You disrupt the market in a profound way. And the only way to take that stand and pursue that is on the moral high ground, is to say, hey, we want the government to stop supporting the dairy industry the same way 50 years ago people wanted them to stop supporting the cigarette industry, and to some extent to stop supporting the alcohol industry. That's also been a change, government attitudes towards alcohol and, the advertising of alcohol. Most places, you can't advertise alcohol at a sporting game anymore and this kind of thing. There's all these kinds of restrictions on the advertising and, the culture of alcohol is changing, including political attitudes towards alcohol and drunk driving and all these things. That change, I don't think you can possibly advocate for those changes without first being vegan, without the boycott as step one.
Yeah,
say, hey, this is immoral, I'm not getting part of it. But the point is, it's only the first step. And what's absolutely necessary after that is exactly political militation, to militate for real political change.
Yeah.
And the impact, in Canada as an example, the impact of abolishing government support for dairy would be devastating, and it would be devastating to the whole industry. Because let me tell you something, veal and leather and dairy, they're one industry. They're different steps of the same cycle of suffering and exploitation. You can't have one without the other. Leather is not going to be produced at the same price if the government isn't subsidizing dairy. Veal isn't going to be available at the same price and with the same quantity and regularity without the government supporting dairy. So these things are linked. If you take one brick out of the wall, the whole wall gets weaker. And in the process of militating, as I say, for political change, of organizing and demanding that kind of political change, you galvanize your whole society, you challenge cultural values, things start to change in all kinds of ways, tangible and intangible. And the first step towards that is to define yourself as vegan and to refuse to buy these things.
Right.
And as we just talked about in another video, at the same time, the difference between vegans and reducitarians, we have to admit, is one of degree. It's true, when you buy a car, the car may invisibly contain non-vegan things. The tires may contain non-vegan things. Chemicals that are in these things. Even the roads, the actual paving, it turns out they use some animal products in it and so on, you know what I mean? There are these kind of unbelievable things you find out about. Wallpaper can be non-vegan and so on. This is true. If you want to put, but the point is, our veganism, as opposed to reducitarianism, is a firm basis to pursue that kind of political change. To say, no, to start with, we will not take taxpayers' dollars and support and subsidize the expansion of the Canadian dairy industry or the New Zealand dairy industry or whatever it is, right? Mm-hmm. And then beyond that, a very easy next step is to say, hey, let's talk about positive taxation. The same way cigarettes, almost every country in the world now, I think, there's a tax on cigarettes, and it's not the same as the tax on school books. There's an extra high tax. We could very easily put a 10% extra tax on dairy milk and recycle some of the money, have reverse taxation, make soy milk cheaper or whatever kind of thing. We can start this kind of process of engineering social change without throwing anyone in prison. It's not going to be like the drug war. It's not going to be like cracking down on opium and cocaine users. We're not going to be throwing people in prison because they're smoking yogurt. You know what I mean? But we can start that step by step. So yeah, for us as a community, as a would-be community, for us as a movement or a proto-movement, defining yourself through that boycott, through the refusal to buy meat and dairy, it's important, it's meaningful, it gives us a sense of identity and purpose, but that's all it does. And now if you want change, you got to go out and get it.